in the Middle East. It's a very important topic that has long been under-researched, but that's starting to change in Washington, especially given Dr. Kemp's latest book, East Moves West, India, China, and Asia's Growing Presence in the Middle East, which will form the basis of today's talk. As Dr. Kemp points out, the Middle East is factoring more and more into India and China's trade, energy, and security considerations. Likewise, Pakistan, Japan, South Korea, and other Asian countries are playing an increasingly visible role in the region. And this comes at a time when, as we're all aware, Western economies have been faltering, and that factor has left a void in the Middle East that many Asian nations are rushing to fill in. Just to give you a few examples, Asia already consumes 2.3 million barrels of oil per day, two-thirds of which come from the Middle East. China and India are quickly becoming Asia's largest oil consumers. And in 2006, China was already the second largest consumer of Middle East oil at 1.84 million barrels consumed per day. Given the enormity of these ties in this and other sectors, of course, new dynamics are emerging in the Middle East. And this shifting context begs many questions. How does China's growing presence in the Middle East challenge American supremacy in the region? How will intra-Asian rivalries affect future alliances and regional cooperation? Will Asian nations be pulled into the complex security issues in the Middle East or be able to limit their interactions to trade and investment? And these are just a few of the questions that Dr. Kemp explores in East Moves West. Now, as most people in this room know, Dr. Kemp is a leading expert in U.S. foreign policy in the broader Middle East. He's currently the Director of Regional Strategic Programs at the Nixon Center and an adjunct professor at the Johns Hopkins Center of Advanced International Studies. In addition to U.S. Middle East policy, Dr. Kemp currently focuses on the geopolitics of energy in the Caspian Basin and the Persian Gulf, the Arab-Israeli peace process, and U.S. relations with Iraq and Iran. Prior to his current position, he was a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where he was director of the Middle East Arms Control Project. Dr. Kemp has been employed at the Department of Defense and was a tenured member of the faculty of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. He also served in the White House during the first Reagan administration and was a special assistant to the President for National Security Affairs and senior director for Near East and South Asia on the National Security Council staff. We're very lucky to have him here today. He's going to be signing the book afterwards. We're selling it for $20, just to let everybody know. You'll just line up afterwards. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Geoff Kemp.
And let's hope all the technology works, because I haven't had a trial run, but I'm just assuming it will. We don't have very long, so what I really want to do is to make two fundamental points and then raise some questions about them. The first is that really, since 2001, since we invaded Afghanistan, the United States has been moving east with its military power. It has a dominant position in the Indian Ocean. We are the guarantor of the Gulf. We have forces everywhere, just about, except Iran. And this, shift eastward of American military power, particularly boots on the ground, is very controversial here and elsewhere. But it coincides with another extraordinary shift that's been happening. It's the movement of the key Asian countries to the west, primarily for economic rather than military reasons. So what you now have is essentially an overlap of essentially American power and growing Asian presence. And the question is, what does all this add up to? Is this going to mean cooperation? Does it mean the Asians are going to replace the United States as the guardian of the Indian Ocean and the Gulf? Does it mean the Asians themselves will start to quarrel with each other if we decide to leave? Is there any reason to expect India and China to behave any differently than any other great power? A lot of people would argue, including a meeting some of us were at this morning with a group of Indians, who essentially say think America at the turn of the 20th century if you want to think how India and China are going to see their future roles in Asia. Now, to sort of make some sense of this confluence of interests, what I am going to do is to quickly go through a series of graphs and maps that are in this book and hopefully illustrate my thesis on the screen with the help of a laser pointer. And I hope you can see this. I don't know. I think that's probably as good a focus as we're going to get, and I apologize if it's not as clear as it could be. But let's just start with the basic issue. You know, why would the Asian countries want to come into an area which is perhaps the most dangerous in the world? If you look at this horizontal ellipse, what I call the war zone, stretching from Cyprus to the Hindu Kush, you've got just about every nasty event in the world, with the exception of the Korean Peninsula and some of the battles in Africa. It's all here. But the irony that we know is that there's a vertical ellipse called the energy ellipse, which contains by far the richest deposits of recoverable fossil fuel. And there is no alternative as yet that is as economic to exploit as this zone of fossil fuel. So it has become extremely important for countries that need fossil fuel, particularly the Asians. And the other interesting little ellipse here is, let me just, a show of hands, how many in this room have been to either Doha, Abu Dhabi, or Dubai? Great. So you don't need me to explain that we also have an extraordinary collection of wealth right here on the Arab Gulf, quite unprecedented. And if you put together wealth, energy, and war, you do have a combustible combination. Now, why are the Asians so interested in the Middle East and vice versa? I mean, first, it's because they are importing from the Middle East predominantly energy. But also there are tourists and some students are moving to Asia. After 9/11, it became more difficult to get visas to the United States and to some of the European countries. And there has been some increase in education between the Middle East and Asia. But predominantly it's the energy exports. In the other direction, what you have, of course, is a huge Asian presence on the ground in the Middle East in the form of labor. You have enormous number of consumer sales. If you go to anywhere in the Gulf, just about every car is either Korean or Japanese. You do have increasing tourism between the major Asian countries and the Middle East, and particularly a lot of the Islamic countries who go to Saudi Arabia. And, of course, there is increasing investments in the Middle East, particularly in the petrochemical industry. Let's quickly go through the energy, which you're all familiar with, I'm certain. This is a projection. This is not a projection. These are the figures for 2006. And it's interesting. What do they show? They show that in 2006, Japan got the bulk of oil from the Middle East.